I find this the single most important public policy issue of our generation, because I think it's beyond climate change now. I think we're actually talking about planet change. If we shut down all carbon CO2 emissions right now, there are so many ecological systems that are off track right now that are on that the ecology is breaking down, that there are so many consequential issues that even though climate change and changes in temperature, hydrology, and water triggered them, repairing them will not undo some of the devastation that's happened to coral reefs, to fish populations, to desertification, because the ecology is too complex. I'm also not a terribly partisan person. I quoted before as saying that I think the Green Party is a critical political movement in our country, and that we have to green our major parties and ensure that I was thrilled to see Elizabeth May take a seat in the because I just and you know, just having to put up with all those boys just to get a seat at the table was so tough. But we keep on. We've got to stop talking about climate change and start talking about planet change. We've got to start being more factual in our discussions. One of the most important things I've done as minister, because when you're in a large government, in a large tent political party, creating change is often, unfortunately, about incrementalism. Don Newman has now just started an organization with a few other people for evidence-based journalism and science and journalism, and we funded it, as many people have. So we have Don Newman, who I think we know is one of the most credible journalists in politics in this country, who has now got an organization of journalists and scientists together to actually try to improve the reporting and accuracy on science. And if I've done one thing in the last 12 months that made all of the question periods worthwhile, and David, you'll know what I mean by that, it was that single act, because I think what Don and that group is doing is actually trying to get to evidence-based, science-based journalism is really critical, and given how much we've undermined, I think, our major media institutions, that we have the editorial content, the money for research, the independence of journalism, I think, has been very much compromised in the last decade or so, and increasingly run by corporate interests and less at some of the autonomy that it plays that's so critical in a democracy. We also, I spend a lot of my time trying to convince other politicians, some unfortunately in my own party and others, that this is a critical issue. That we've got to stop talking about it as if it's a crisis far off in the future. We actually have to be more serious about connecting it to it and not assume that everything that's happening out there is disconnected to it. For example, we just went through the worst droughts in China in modern history. In central China, 1,400 reservoirs dried up and were dead. That was the word used in the Chinese media. Dead in central China. Loss of the wheat crop, huge food crisis in China. And you know what the conditions in central China right now are? If you follow everyone reads weather reports for central China, right? They're having record floods. Precipitation, after coming through one of the worst droughts, devastated the wheat crop. They now have huge flooding. People are dying in large numbers right now in some communities. Some are dying, but large numbers of people are being displaced by floods. This is a few months later. China goes from record droughts to record floods. Lake Mead, the Colorado River, is our closest band of desertification. We have 10 years left of water in Lake Mead. Well, it happens to be the water supply for Las Vegas, which for Canadians in winter for cheap discount vacations are quite familiar with that place. But you can imagine when Lake Mead is empty, which we're 10 years away from. The Colorado River, by the time it gets to California right now, is almost dry. We're simply having a freshwater crisis right now. In France, 2/3, there's been a agricultural water crisis in France. 2/3 of all of the rural communities in France are now suffering from water shortages because their aquifer levels are substandard. Our food supply, so critical to all of us, is under challenge right now. We have lost 50% of the population of the 20 most common bird species in North America, and as you know, our colonizing honeybees are in crisis from a whole range of toxins and mites, climate, and other environmental factors. So once you start to lose critical mass of pollinating species, for those of us who are at the top of the food chain, becomes an existential issue for us. And we're not seriously into increased temperatures. We're at CO2 levels in the atmosphere that have cast a future for us that is hard to change in the near term, possible to change with some courage and some leadership in the longer term. But we're not experiencing the more severe realities of it. We've just had 200-300-year flood events on the prairies. I was the mayor of the city, the largest city on a floodplain, so I became very acutely aware of the power of water and the weather and climate systems on the power of that. If you've been following, finally they built the floodway around the Red River and then have to double the size of it. And of course, it's the Assiniboine River, the other river into Winnipeg, that overflows and forced actually a breach of the diking system and forced flooding of people's homes. That southern Saskatchewan has gone from record droughts to record levels of precipitation and the highest ever recorded. So the extremes in climate and that, these are immediate. When you start seeing in a decade 200, 300, 500-year water, flood, and precipitation events, we are into a changed climate. And it is impossible for me to find anyone who's credibly been able to make the case that anthropogenic or human-generated climate change isn't a fundamental and critical component to it. Well, we just went through a federal election where this was hardly discussed. Do you know, if you follow me on Twitter or Facebook, you know what the big single attack I get? I just got it coming over here right now if you want to. It's Glen 4TC. Glen at 4TC. You can find it really funny. It's just, I was laughing at the irony of it. I'm on my way over in the car, and there's a full Tory attack on me about carbon pricing and about these kinds of issues because they finally, after years after they were given advice to the Federal Conservative Party when it changed, they finally read the policies that I and Jim Flaherty's former chief of staff, ironically of all things, wrote on environmental economic policy and climate and planet change. I mean, and I kept on reminding them that you might want to read the whole thing. The biggest point of attack, the only public policy that the opposition party has argued that it will rip up is the Green Energy Act. That ends wind and solar development as a serious thing. It also creates a huge disadvantage because 27 states have now imitated the Green Energy Act and also have feed-in tariffs. This is argued as a perverse subsidy that hard-working Ontario families are struggling to pay for, when we have the same party that's done that if you put $1 into the oil sands right now, you get 42.5 cents back. Well, you can take the most generous subsidy that we have in Ontario for wind or solar, and I'm sorry, it doesn't come. I mean, I wouldn't even get into the complete chain of subsidies that goes into the dirtiest oil and fossil fuel development. Doesn't even come close.
How about nuclear?
Well, we can get to nuclear in that. That's the hot one that divides. I can't even say. It's like when I was growing up, choice was the issue you never brought up at the family dinner table. Today it's nuclear because people just get polarized on that. And I can tell you my view on it if you like, because I won't be a chicken. I'm not known as a chicken or for hiding from issues. But that's the critical matter. So here we have, and let's be very honest about it, a good Green Energy Act, some good international deals. To get a sense of how big the clean technology, if you don't think this is economically positive, they'll just give you some numbers. You know how many clean tech companies in water and energy there are in Ontario right now? Over 3,000. That's how many people get up every day. That's how many people go to work. That's how many companies are there. 65,000 people get out of bed every day in Ontario to go to work in the clean tech sector, where they're working at Xenon, making better membranes that are low energy, where they're working at Andrew Benedict's new company, which turns sewage into energy. This is the guy who invented Xenon. That has now just launched one of the largest companies, raised his capital in Europe here. We have one of our fastest growing companies is that. Whether they're one of 10,000 farmers who now have solar microfits on their farm, and they're actually helping save the family farm because they're producing not just vegetables, but they're also producing green energy, and we're smartening the grid. I mean, you can just go through this all the way through every element of that to advanced composite materials, so vehicles and can be made out of lighter, stronger materials, and new engine technologies, and all kinds of extraordinary things. That's 65,000 people, $8 billion in GDP. And I said 3,000. That is larger than the auto sector, which was previously our largest manufacturing integrated sector, larger than that. It's also larger than what was the second largest industrial sector in Ontario, which was the aerospace sector. So this is now our largest sector. The point of contact right now from the opposition parties, and I'm not just taking cheap shots at them, has been a full frontal assault on the international agreements. I mean, we have no problem. I mean, I have to tell you, this is like if you rip up the Green Energy Act, you destroy the Samsung deal, you take away microfit, you do all of that, which they're proposing to do. That would have been like in 1967, the Premier of Ontario had stood up and torn up the Auto Pact agreement with the United States. Now, you might not like the fact that we're the auto manufacturing center of North America right now. You know, it's recovered 9,000 jobs. They have paid their loans, and they certainly get subsidies. I mean, every time someone says subsidies, the auto sector has just gone through one of the biggest bailouts and transfers of wealth from the public to the private sector in a long time. But that sector grew the economy. It would be pretty hard to imagine Ontario becoming as wealthy as it has right now. But to the new economy, the stuff that we cherish and value, we haven't treated it any more generously than AutoPact was to the auto sector. We're actually making comparable investments in research and development. Our ministry's put about $3.6 billion into R&D and green technologies. We've actually created a green energy sector and a green, clean water technology sector with these agreements that are not that dissimilar to the trade agreements and the partnerships that gave us our car industry that we were so successful with in United. But the same people who would never dare criticize AutoPact as a massive subsidy, you know, that our struggling families have to pay so much for their cars right now because the public sector is involved in the auto sector, are the same people who are prepared to shred much less public sector, much lower levels of public sector investment and subsidy on green energy. And if you do that, we will be left to the auto sector. We will be left to those energy-intensive sectors, and that's where they want to take us. That is the ballot point question, right? That is the first major series of announcements that he will tearing up the Ontario Power Authority, getting out of the energy planning business. This is from a party that left us with brownouts in 2003, divested about a $2 billion infrastructure disinvestment in our grid system. Never mind smart, it was barely standing. They had to put diesel engines in downtowns of most major cities as backup systems, and the grid failed. You know, nuclear is a challenge. I don't see nuclear in the longer term as a solution, but with the industrial base that we have in the short term, the political realities are that nuclear is a bridge technology to get through where we are. We can debate that. I just don't think the reality, when you've got 52% of your generation right now, and I've looked at the numbers, I am always open to be persuaded. But I don't think you can win that battle. I think part of what's happening is that the green progressive agenda, wherever it finds expression in whatever political party, is under full political assault, and successfully. The uninformed media, the not evidence-based media, loves this stuff. I get more attacks on positions that I've taken over my lifetime on environmental issues and on energy-related issues that are progressive. You can't even say that. I mean, the stuff that we're doing right now is not anywhere near where we need to be. But you know, we're the only people who aren't backing off. Do you know? We're the only people, and the third party has been under full attack on the same thing. You know what the biggest attack on the NDP has been? Smart meters. I sat there and listened to 4 questions because someone in Hamilton, God knows, we're all so perfect, these things never happen, installed 4 smart meters on 3 houses that were going to be demolished to build a road in Hamilton, and that occupied the leader's questions and the environment critic questions. And I get up and said, you know how many stupid things happen with automobiles, fossil fuels, and that kind of thing? Do you actually think attacking that? So so what do we get? You come down and watch it. The leader of the third party stands up. Mary Jane Smith had a smart meter installed last week, and her bill went up 340%. The standard question answer thing, the answer from one of us in government is, please send us the bill. Did she install a swimming pool in her backyard? And if it is, maybe the meter's broken. Do you know, when you actually try to completely transform, which is the level of change that we have to have, this has been $1 billion transformation so that we actually meter energy, because if you can't measure it, you can't price it. And cost of your prices. So what's the alternative? Yeah, tear up, which is exactly what the opposition parties, and to be fair, you know why I like the Green Party, because they've been very clear and they've been very vocally supportive. Mike Shriney's been very vocally supportive of this. We're fighting for such basic things as to try and build environmental measures into our infrastructure to do that. I'm sorry, you have to be able, I do my washing and drying in the middle of the night. and on Saturdays. Do you know what I mean? It ain't a hardship. My grandmother laughs at this kind of stuff. I mean, she was a cleaning lady. She was a char. She came to this country, didn't speak English. She made minimum wage. She made 9 children. And, and I don't expect we should all have to plunge back into that hardship. But I mean, if we're not as a generation prepared to make a meter, like we can't actually turn a little thing on our washer or dryer to two hours before, or be smart enough to at 7 o'clock. I mean, we're now down to 7 o'clock. I mean, please. I mean, how much more precious does this whole thing have to get? So that's where we're at right now. Like, I mean, this is the big attack from both parties. And it works. Because you can say things that are half true, put them in a 30-second attack ad, and spread it all out. And by the time we're explaining to why smart meters and that, because the alternative is if we don't actually change our energy power plant, then we do get into that. Because if you really don't want to see more nuclear, and you don't want to see more of that, because dispatchable power is the challenge. My ministry is massively investing right now in dozens of companies and researchers across Ontario and around the world to try and figure out how to make solar and wind more dispatchable, right? Which is the challenge. And if you know what I mean by dispatchable, because I get caught up in the language I didn't really understand only a year ago as I learned more about that. But we're looking at batteries and different mechanisms. So when you generate a rate, you can keep it for it matches demand. We need to do that because, there's a great book by James Howard Kunstler called The Long Emergency. And he talks about the challenge in North America of weaning ourselves off fossil fuels and off nuclear and the problems in dispatchable and in grid for energy-intensive societies. The final thing, I think, and I think the most important piece of legislation that we brought forward that's environmental is the Places to Grow plan, which actually does the one thing. You want to get rid of commutes? Then people who work in Mississauga should live in Mississauga. And people who work in Toronto. One of the things, co-efficiency and high-speed rail, quite frankly, rather than more roads, and actually pricing to do that. We're struggling to get the Eglinton friggin' subway LRT line built, that we're down to that. We just elected a mayor in the city who thinks that LRT is a 4-letter word. I won't even go into spelling, but anyway, that's another. And remember the first thing that the Harris government did was it got the bulldozers out and filled in our last attempt. By both the Liberals and the NDP, to be fair, when both parties committed to that, and they were digging out landfill that was put in to fill in the Eglinton subway line. We're down as the only government. We're 100% of the funding for Toronto's Transit Capital Program for Transit City. 100% of that is provincial money. The city has to pick up operating costs, and they give them credit for that. The feds have squat in it, right? We've got the subway line extension. We need to be much more than that. Every neighborhood, we should be able to walk to work or take transit almost anywhere in the GTA. And Places to Grow, which won the American Daniel Burnham Award, actually forces a pattern of intensification and of co-location. I'll give you this, why are we doing this? Because prior to coming to office in the 95 to 2005 when I saw that, I'll just give you a statistic. You want to know what drives energy costs, and we have to have demand-side solutions first, but it's just spatial organization. Calgary has 32 million square feet of office space. You know how big Calgary is? One of the biggest cities, second largest number of head offices after Toronto. My friend, for those of us who spend too much time on planes and too big a carbon footprint, that's a huge. Outside of downtown Toronto, you don't find anything on that kind of scale. Well, between 1995 and 2005, we added that much office space, 32,000 square feet of office space to the GTA. That's huge. We built a Calgary. We built a Calgary economy in the GTA for commercial office space. 90% of that was built a kilometer or more away from higher order transit. Okay, which meant that 90% of the office space built in the 90s and the beginning of this last decade require people to take a car to get to work. So how much are the highway widenings, the cost of congestion, the emissions, and the lost productivity of time sitting in cars when your lack of planning of a city, which is, as you know, my life's work, and I believe it's one of the most important things, is if you are immediately guaranteeing that transit and active transportation is not an option for 90% of your new office space. Do you know what I mean? And that was the reason, and I give the Premier a lot, the Greenbelt came in and Places to Grow came in. And it is a fight every single day with some mayors who have been wonderful on it, other mayors who are fighting us, developers that are fighting us. Those are the kinds of things that we need to do. We need to spatially reorganize our city so that we have choices. So we don't have to use a liter of milk, a liter of gasoline to simply get a liter of milk, that you can actually walk to a corner store. I mean, these things are fundamental, and we're trying to do that, but they take 20 or 30 or 40 years to do, right? At least fortunately by 2050, about 40% of the buildings that will be built aren't built yet. So hopefully we can stop making the same mistakes over on the balance. But these are not ballot issues, and I want to thank each and every one of you, as I'll wrap up at this point, for being so concerned, to not getting caught up in consumer politics, to not becoming a consumer. And every time I want to scream, I hear when we refer to us as taxpayers. I'm not a taxpayer. Taxpaying is a function that I get to do, and it's a privilege because it's part of my responsibility in living in a democracy, and it's one of the most efficient ways for me to give and to build the kind of society and share the commonwealth. And I'm more privileged, fortunately, in my family than most. I don't mind paying my fair share and making that contribution. I am not a voter. I do a lot more than vote. And I am not a consumer. Those are activities. I am a citizen, and with that citizenship comes rights and responsibilities. And there's too few of us who see that as the inherent, fundamental part of our inheritance from our parents. It is going to be the quality of our citizenship, for those of us in this room, that is going to determine what the quality of our legacy is for our children. And right now, a planet that sometime mid-century is 2 or 3 or 4 degrees Celsius in mean temperature higher than it is right now, with fish stocks lost, agricultural problems, unstable climate, and a planet that we inherited in pretty pristine condition at the dawn of the industrial age, leaving it as rack and ruin for the purposes of human existence, is the most shameful legacy given the inheritance that we as human beings have. And we have the ability. We're the smartest, most tech-savvy, most educated, wealthy generation in history. 2.5% of the world's population, and about 2.5% or more of its CO2, 2.5% of its CO2 emissions, much smaller percentage of that. And I'm tired of that excuse. It's not our capacity of how much we emit. It's on a per-person basis. We're huge environmental footprint. It's our technology of what is our capacity to give to the planet. Our capacity to give to the planet as Canadians, I would argue, is disproportionately greater. We have more capacity. We have used 60% in North America of the world's resources with 5% of the population. We should be 60% of the solution, at least, in returning it back. And if we started to relate our responsibilities to change the world, to be a beacon of light, to reinvest in the majority world, should be proportional to our consumption, not to our population. So I'd like us to take the responsibility to be responsible for 60% of the solution, because we have 60% of the wealth, and we have disproportionately benefited from the environmental catastrophes that are happening much more at our footsteps because of our consumption than any other. This is a hard road to fight. We are in a small minority right now. I think truth and beauty is on our side. At least truth. As I get older, beauty is less important. Truth becomes more important. So I want to thank you very much for that, and God bless, and keep you all safe. Thank you very much. I look forward to it.